Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Dr. Anna Uden. I'm a postdoctoral therapist in the state of Washington. And today we're talking about some questions I think are important for you to ask yourself if you're considering a career in psychology, or specifically in clinical psychology, because that's what I speak to. Just a brief little background about my own journey with clinical psychology. So I got my bachelor's in psychology from Emory University, then I got my master's and doctorate in clinical psychology, and now I am in my postdoctoral years. I do have a private practice in the state of Washington, but I'm still accruing hours and preparing to take the exam for the clinical psychologist licensure. So I'm not all the way there yet, but very, very close. That's the lens that I'm coming from. So I have 5 questions for you today. First one is, do you want to attend grad school? If you want to use a degree in psychology directly, then it's pretty much necessary to have grad school training, at least a master's, if not a doctorate as well. I do know some people who majored in psychology in undergrad who went on to be lawyers or doctors. Definitely possible to use psychology for a different career, but all of those still require grad school. So even if you're not going to grad school for psychology, if you're going to use your psychology degree, you're probably still going to need to go to grad school for something. Just a bachelor's degree in psychology is unfortunately pretty useless in the workforce these days, because there really is just so much to learn, so much more than they could possibly teach you in 2 to 4 years in undergrad. So your options for grad school are, you can finish a master's program in 2 years if you're diligent about it. Some do it in 3, sometimes shit happens, people do it in longer than that, 4 years if need be. Or if you're looking at the doctoral level, you need at least 5 to 6 years. Sometimes people who do a PhD, which is more research, go for longer because they kind of stay however long their advisor wants them to stay for research. Sometimes it can be 7, 8 years. Or if you're more on the clinical side, not as much in research, like in a PsyD program, which is what I did, you can do that in as little as 5 years, because you're not depending so much on somebody wanting you to stay there for cheap labor, basically. Second question that I have for you is, how comfortable are you with public speaking? This is one that you're probably not expecting is important to ask yourself if you're considering a career in psychology, but you would be surprised at how important it is. So I went into psychology partly because I was very introverted. I thought, okay, it's mostly going to be one-on-one interactions, not going to be a whole lot of speaking to groups of people. And boy, that was not the case. So in grad school, typically you need to do around 1 to 2 presentations for each course. And if you're taking like 5, 6 courses, you can do the math on how many presentations that is per semester, not per year, per semester. Then in grad school, there's something called practicum, which is a yearly training opportunity where you're working as a therapist or you're working in assessment. It's kind of more like whatever you choose for that. It's kind of like a clinical rotation. That would be the equivalent for like medical doctors. And so usually you do 3 practica and 1 internship at the doctoral level. At the master's level, usually you do 1 or 2 internships, they're just called. And in order to get those positions, you do need to apply to them and interview for them. I would say most people have like 5 to 10 yearly interviews, and a lot of those are in a group setting. Sometimes it'll literally just be a panel of people who are asking you different questions, and if you're not used to that, it can definitely be very unnerving because you're speaking to like 5 clinical psychologists, really putting you on the spot, trying to make a good impression. As you can imagine, you have to get good at public speaking real quick. Then in these clinical rotations, usually you have about 1 to 2 case presentations per year, often in front of everyone at the institution or the department. So if you're going into psychology thinking, oh, this can just be, one-on-one interactions with people, it might be hard for you. And, I don't regret going into psychology. And like I said, I am an introvert, but it is a lot more taxing on introverts than you would think. Question number 3. How much do you value your independence? Something that I feel like no one really told me when I went into this field was that there would be a lot of limitations on my independence. I was surprised in grad school that you didn't really get to use those long summer vacations. They're basically not a thing in grad school because you do have to start those clinical rotations in June, July, August, depending on the placement. And so I was fully expecting to be able to spend the summers at home with my grandmother in Romania. That did not end up happening. Usually I only had like a week or two to do that. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're thinking, oh, grad school, I'll have the summers to relax, take it slow. Actually, not the case. There's a good chance you're going to be working through the summer, and a lot of that is unpaid. Up until you finish all your courses, it will probably be unpaid. Then once you're actually licensed, it can, in some cases, be considered abandonment if you leave your clients without a safety net, without somebody to check in with if they're high risk, or, if you go on a very extended vacation and you don't have other resources for them, and they do need those other resources if they're higher level of care. It's not always the case, if you're working with a pretty high functioning population, if you make that very clear in your informed consent, you could still have the freedom to travel, take extended breaks. But you never know when a client might suddenly become more acute in their symptomatology, and you cannot just abandon them according to the law. And even putting aside the issue of taking extended breaks, it's just a lot of responsibility as a therapist for other people's lives and their well-being. Even in ways that, honestly, in the field, we don't think it should be that way. We don't think that we have the ability to control what other people do, the actions they do and don't take. But the law doesn't quite agree with us in all those cases. So whether we like it or not, sometimes there is a legal responsibility to ensure the safety of our clients. And also there are limitations on where you can practice based on licensure. So you can't just easily pick up and move to another state, or certainly not another country, because there isn't all that much interconnectedness between these different governing bodies to make sure that someone who's licensed in Alabama can practice in France or Massachusetts or whatever it may be. So that's another thing, is unfortunately, if you want complete autonomy and freedom, probably not going to get that in this field. Question number 4. Are you okay being professional at all times? Let me tell you a little story. So when I was around 15, I was traveling with my family in Transylvania, and my aunt and uncle got close with one of the waiters at the inn where we were staying. And he seemed very professional, very nice, very cordial. We got to know him a little bit. And on our last day, I saw him in town in his regular clothes, not in his professional clothes. And it was very off-putting because it was so different from the professional persona, the facade that he wore at his job. And of course, it's his right to wear whatever he wants to wear. That's not the point. I'm not saying that he did anything wrong. It just can be very off-putting for someone to see a figure who is in a very professional setting in a more unprofessional manner. Like imagine seeing your flight pilot when he's at home in sweatpants. It's very different from the way we see these professionals at work. Kind of shifts the way we see them. And with therapists, I think this is even more important because you're building an actual relationship, a therapeutic relationship with your clients. And, they want to be able to trust you. They want to feel like you're a responsible person, like you have a certain amount of authority, that you make healthy decisions. So it can be a little bit strange if you give off unprofessional appearance or actions to clients, either in therapy or outside of therapy. So an example is, I know a therapist who told the story about how she had a lot of liquor bottles behind her in the place where she would do Zoom with her clients. And that it occurred to her on one occasion when a client commented on it that maybe that's not super professional to do. And so she switched to the location from which she does teletherapy. It's things like that, it's like having your clients see your bar card behind you when you're doing teletherapy, or coming to work dressed in sweatpants, or having like a really risque book on your desk when you're working with them. Client suddenly can't see you as a professional. Unfortunately, that can cause ruptures in the relationship. That can impede the progress that they make in therapy. Now, does this mean that you can never let loose? No, of course not. I think especially if you live in like a rural area, a small town, you're not going to be on the clock 24/7. Of course, there's a chance you're going to run into clients. Shit happens, you still have a right to live your life. Or I once knew a therapist who told someone else's story. This was a gay man who went to like bathhouses in his free time, and he found out that one of his clients was also a gay man who attended the bathhouses. And, he still went and did it because that was his social circle. There were just certain limitations in terms of how he could interact with this person. Or another example is I like to go to electronic music festivals sometimes. And, I dress like I'm going to an electronic music festival. I'm not dressed in like professional attire, Is there a chance that I could run into a client there? Yes, there is. It's really a balancing act of what's the likelihood of this and how harmful is it if they see me doing this thing, I think there's a difference between wearing a crop top and doing drugs out in public. That's a little bit different. And there are also very high expectations for professionalism on social media for therapists. I could make a whole video about this because obviously I am a therapist on social media. So I've done like deep dives into how to have an ethical presence online as a therapist, what to do, what not to do. But again, because it is a very professional relationship where unfortunately they have to see you in a little bit of that idealized neutral role in order for therapy to work. And another way that I think professionalism shows up for therapists is there's a lot of emphasis on integrating personal and professional identities. In other words, who you are outside of work, outside of therapy, needs to be very congruent with who you are inside of therapy. And I do know exceptions to this rule. I do know therapists who are not very kind people, who have done very bad things. Can a person like that be a successful therapist? Sure, but there's a pretty high risk that if they continue to take part in unprofessional behavior in their personal life, that will impact their professional sphere as well. Like if you steal from your friend, it's not unheard of that one day you might steal from a client. One day masks crack, facades fall. It's important to be congruent with who you are as a person, professionally and personally. And question number 5. This one is a bit of a risky one. How much of your interest in psychology stems from your own desire to fix your mental health? If you go into psychology, one question that you're going to hear over and over and over again from people, especially from interviewers, is what brought you into this field? Why psychology? Why clinical psychology? Why be a therapist? All this stuff. And I think if we're being honest, a lot of the times what they're trying to gauge is, are you in this field to save yourself? There's this archetype of the wounded healer in Jungian psychology. Some people, I think if they were to point blank tell you their opinion on it, don't think that those who want to save themselves should be therapists. Now, I think they're in a minority here. I think we're coming to a place of destigmatizing mental health issues and realizing that, hey, people in all types of different healthcare settings sometimes are drawn to those fields because of personal connections they have to it, whether it's, oh, my mom has Parkinson's, so I'm studying Parkinson's, or I personally have depression, so I want to go into psychology. I think it's great that as a collective, we're starting to normalize that a little bit more and to realize that it's okay. Like, it doesn't mean that you have anything to be ashamed of. The reason I bring up this question is because if that's the case, if you're going into psychology to fix yourself, to heal yourself, it might be worth asking yourself if there's a less costly, more time-efficient way to accomplish the same thing. Honestly, as a therapist, I do have a pretty substantial toolkit of resources to draw from when I'm struggling myself. It definitely helps with that. But those are things that honestly you could learn by doing independent research, going into intensive therapy, doing some reading on your own. Because a lot of the things that they teach you in grad school for psychology is not necessarily just interventions. That's honestly kind of a minority of what they teach you. So if that's really the bulk of what you're wanting to learn because you're hoping to heal yourself, it's not necessary for you to become a therapist. You can still learn those things and go into a different career. There's a lot more to psychology than just learning the interventions, learning certain skills, certain toolkits. To become a therapist, you have to do a lot of really hard things that involve a lot more than just learning how to get better. But on the other hand, if you are really passionate about psychology in addition to wanting to heal yourself, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's a bad idea. It's not a shameful thing. If you truly want to be a therapist and you think this is the right path for me based on whatever pros and cons come with the field. I don't think it's any more shameful to say I'm going into psychology because I have bipolar disorder than it would be to say I'm going into pulmonology because I have severe asthma. So it's not a matter of right and wrong, it's just a matter of doing what's in your best interest. And I think you have to be really honest with yourself, and you do have to have a good answer to that question of why are you in this field. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I'll see if I can respond to a few of them, and I hope you have a nice day.